So to your point, you don't have to say a word at this test. You just have to point. So if you're nonverbal and we are looking at whether you even understand what I'm saying and whether you recognize some of these pictures, this can help note that. A lot of our children are significantly compromised both in language and in cognition. And so you would not expect to give this and get a score that's anything higher than single-digit percentiles, if that. And a lot of them will probably score below the first percentile. And you can't really measure anything based on their age from that. But what you can do is give a really explicit narrative when you're talking about the performance of the test, and you would explain the kinds of things they were getting right. So you would look at your words and you would say, he doesn't know any verbs, but he is really good with nouns.
Okay.
Maybe he likes things that have to do with this, or he names correctly things, foods.
Okay.
But he doesn't name anything else.
Okay.
Or maybe he only knows core words. So stop is in there. I think go is in there, or in the early period.
Okay.
And so maybe he only knows core words.
Okay.
Or maybe he doesn't know any of it. Maybe he doesn't understand to point. So all of those things you discuss in detail in the narrative so that you have some measure. I frequently give this test to my nonverbal students who are working with devices. And if I can give it with fidelity, so I don't need to like model things for him, and I don't need to keep reminding him to look at all the pictures and that sort of thing. So if I can give it with fidelity, I might include the standard score. But I might give this and not give it with fidelity and say I can't report a standard score because I didn't give this with fidelity.
Okay.
But he did do this when I did this and do this when I did this. Now with the EBT, which I know is not the test that you're discussing, but it's the one word vocabulary that we're talking about. If I have been known to give this test to a student with a device, you can't report a score for that because it's not normed for students with devices.
Okay.
And if you have a student with a device, I'm going to show you.
Okay.
So if you have a student with a device and the word is lion, and the kid knows how to get there, you go to groups, you go to wild animals, and then you go to lion.
Lion.
He had a choice. So he's not choosing it from nothing.
Okay.
He could look at a picture and recognize the picture that matches that.
Okay.
So while it's not measuring his word finding ability necessarily, it does give you valid information when you're testing a student with no language.
Okay.
Or with no oral speech.
And that's the expressive test.
That's the expressive
Okay.
test. And so again, if you're having to do a lot of repositioning the person, remodeling, sometimes I've given this test where I had to point to all of the pictures to make sure that the student was looking at all the pictures.
Okay.
And when I do that, that's not giving the test with
Right.
fidelity, so I can't report a standard score.
Right. Right. All right.
But it does give you information that you can write in your report, as long as you're being very clear about how you presented it
Okay.
and what they needed in order to get that.
Okay. And so a lot of my colleagues found the picture of the test online or found videos about the test online. And I checked this out through you. Would I be able to check it out myself, or do I need my SLP to like call ahead? Like, would I have been able to go
I don't know
there?
the answer to that, but
Okay.
I think you could.
Okay.
I think you could.
And who
I
do
don't know. I don't know who is allowed to give this test.
Okay.
I know that speech pathologists are allowed to give this
Okay.
test. I think that psychologists are allowed to give this test. But it should say in the test, in fact, I'm sure it says in the
Yeah.
test, who you have to be and what credentials you have to have in order to give this test. Examiner qualifications, page 3.
I'm guessing it's B and not C. Or, yeah.
Page 3. May be administered and scored by individuals with a range of educational backgrounds, provided that they are thoroughly familiar with the test materials, have received training in procedures for individual test administration,
Okay.
which you will have when you have all the training you need to give the Woodcock.
Okay.
That gives you training in the procedures for
Okay.
for giving a test, and this has very specific directions for what you're allowed to say, for what you're not allowed to say,
Okay.
and have carefully read the methods for computing this test, all the details, blah blah blah.
Okay.
So yes, you would be able to give this test.
So anyone can give this test who knows how to give this test, basically.
Yes, and has had training in giving standardized tests
Okay.
and computing the scores for it.
Okay.
You also have to be thoroughly aware of the uses and the drawbacks
Okay.
of this test,
Cool.
because it's possible to give this test and then say it's measuring something that it's not.
Okay.
Say, I have seen reports where it says person scored, I don't know, within one standard deviation of the mean, which means that they don't have a language impairment. Well, that's not necessarily the case. They might not have a word finding impairment or a receptive vocabulary impairment, but they might have other language impairments.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, they might, it's a receptive language test or a receptive vocabulary test. They might say, if they didn't know exactly what this measured, they scored 1.5 standard deviations from the mean. And so that shows that they have a language impairment,
Okay.
a full receptive language impairment. Well, that may not be true either, because
Okay.
you haven't tested memory, you haven't tested following directions, you haven't tested understanding receptive language, all of those things.
Okay.
So you have to know what it's testing. You have to be trained in testing things and figuring out how to get the scores and what they mean.
Okay.
And yeah, you'd be able to give this test.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Let's get your score.